Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Licorice Pizza, starring Alana Haim, Cooper Hoffman, Sean Penn, Tom Waits, Bradley Cooper, and Benny Safdie, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. Welcome back to Paul Thomas Anderson, folks. I reviewed him way back before Phantom Thread came out, and this is also part of an Academy Award nominees for Best Picture, so that's why I'm doing this movie, even though I should have done it a long time ago. My fault there. And remind me, what is this movie titled Licorice Pizza for? As we'll never get an answer uh for the whole movie. You'll see what I mean when we get to it. Let's get into it now that I think about it. It's 1973 in San Fernando Valley, and Gary Valentine, played by Cooper Hoffman, who is Philip Seymour Hoffman's son in real life, meets Alana Kane, played by Alana Haim, who meet for the first time as he's 15 years old and who's an actor while she's 25 years old, excuse me, and he asks her out and they get to know each other as well as the audience while getting a picture taken for the school while Lana gets hit on quite a lot, which is a good move, I guess, by Paul Thomas Anderson. But by Gary, that's a little creepy, in my opinion. Or maybe, nah, you know what? It's just fucking creepy. Let's just keep going. Gary has an 8-year-old brother named Greg as Gary goes on his first date with Alana as he breathes loudly and as he's quite nervous while on the date with Alana and goes googly eyed on her. And he goes rather quickly, as that's the kind of thing I wouldn't do on a first date, but their chemistry is absolutely nice, I'll say, to watch on screen. As Alana Haim is a singer in real life, and her acting is great, while Cooper Hoffman is brilliant in this movie. I do like the way the movie is shot for the whole movie, as it feels typical Paul Thomas Anderson, as it works for him very well, particularly when he's with his mother at her job and at lunch telling him she can't take him to New York, but brings Alana while flirting with the waitress Brenda. And we meet Lance Brannigan, yeah, Brannigan, who is acting with Gary as they get on stage on a stage show in New York and go on a talk show with Jerry while the kids in her show under one roof perform a song, Yours, Mine, and Ours. And Gary makes a dumb joke about doing three beavers, which is a bad joke to begin with. And Gary did come off like an ass, but the creator Lucy Doolittle is upset with Gary, which was an interesting scene, I'll say. Gary auditions for a commercial with William and Gail, who's played by Maya Rudolph, who's in that only scene, but that's okay with me because she's not ruinous in this movie. Gary sees Alana on a date with Lance while Gary sees them and he's eating in a car with his mother, and he's at home and calls Alana without saying a word to each other and hangs up, and that shows how much he doesn't like it. Lance goes to Alana's place and disrespects the family by saying he's an atheist, and Lance is thrown out of the house, and Alana's upset about it, and her family comes off like assholes to Alana and her boyfriends, and the writing is magnificent in my opinion. Gary goes in a store to see a waterbed as he gets an idea to sell waterbeds, and they invent an expo and a teen expo, I'll say, that they show everyone what they're making as we walk by a cameo of a Frankenstein by John C. Reilly, as it was nice to see him in another Paul Thomas Anderson film after Hard Eight and Magnolia. They start selling the waterbeds while Gary sees Alana as she's selling earrings for someone named Jojo, and as she sees Gary getting arrested by the cops and taken into custody for what reason? Because they're led to believe he murdered someone when he would never do anything like that because he doesn't have a gun, first of all, and the witness says, second of all, that's not him, and they let him go as it takes a while for Gary to get the fuck out of there. And she asks, what did he do? And they start running away together, which was funny in a smart way, I'll say. Gary and Alana advertise their waterbed advertisement on the radio as they become a business and start selling waterbeds like fucking crazy as they get UPS to deliver it to people's houses. and make a shit ton of money. And this script is smartly written. Despite Gary's romantic relationship with Alana is rather inappropriate for me because he's a teenager, while she's 25 years old. Alana's on the phone with a customer named Ted, and Gary tells her to talk sexy, and she does. And Gary gets upset that she's said they have something they do not have. And the next thing you know, Gary talks to Alana to become an actress. While in the meeting, Alana gets all tough with her as she says no to being in nudity in the movies. And Gary and Alana get upset about showing her boobs as he's never seen them before. And before she leaves, she decides to show them, which was a humorous scene in my opinion, as they open their business called Fat Bernie's. Gary bumps into an old friend named Sue as Alana is super jealous of her with Gary, and the performances work tremendously as I feel the relationship getting beautiful versus heartbroken. And as of now, it's heartbroken, and you feel it with the characters. Alana spies on Gary making out with Sue, and she makes out with another guy and runs home all depressed. As we move on to Alana auditioning for Jack Holden, played briefly by Sean Penn, as he works great in this movie, as this is one of the greatest performances since Mystic River. He takes Alana to the same restaurant Gary took her in the beginning of the movie, and they order martinis as he's good friends with Rex Blau, played by Tom Waits, who's a singer as well as an actor. But here he plays the director of Jack's previous work as they get drunk out of their fucking minds while Alana and Gary and his friends are there, and Alana makes mean faces to Gary as Rex puts Jack on a motorcycle to do a stunt from a movie he did back in the day. As Jack drops Alana while doing the stunt, and after Alana asks if he remembers her name, and Gary goes after Alana to see if she's okay. And I love that scene, as Tom Waits and Sean Penn are very energetic in this scene, as it worked very fucking great, and they become friends again. And that was beautiful, as it was beautifully shot, in my opinion. Gary and Alana lay down in the waterbed as he tries to grab her boob briefly, but decides not to, and I wouldn't touch it if it were me, because I'm not a pervert. As the next day, they're at a diner, and they hear their merchandise is made in fabric, which is oil, and Gary stops at the gas station where there's no gasoline or oil, deciding to get rid of the waterbeds and sell the store as they go to the house of John Peters, played by Bradley Cooper, whose girlfriend is Barbara Streisand. And Bradley Cooper is barely in this movie like some other actors, as he talks with Gary and acts like a fucking psycho. And I love his energy, and it's unfortunate he's barely in this, as he had to do Guillermo del Toro's Nightmare Alley, but he threatens to kill his family, including Greg, and they get started on their waterbed, and Alana thinks of messing up the waterbed itself by unhooking the hose, and they run out quickly and somehow bump into John himself and blames his assistant Steve because Barbara Streisand dumped his ass, and gets gasoline while Alana is driving, and John gets his own gasoline, and Alana ditches John and Gary, smashing John's car. And the truck runs out of gas, and they roll backwards and try to get to the gas station, but they stop in the middle of the street as there's no traffic in the middle of the night, and finally get some gasoline in the truck, which was a hell of an intense scene for a dark comedy, I'll say. Alana calls up an old friend named Brian as she applies to get a job for a future Senator Joel Wax, played by Benny Safdie, who's the director of one of the films I might review eventually called Uncut Gems, which is, in my opinion, the best performance by Adam Sandler in any movie, as we start following Alana working for Joel. Well, Gary is jealous of Joel as he runs out of tape, thanks to Gary's jealousy and fucking it up, while Gary thinks about getting pinball machines and making, because they start to get legal again, calling while Alana is pissed at Gary for leaving her to get some pinball machines. And the argument they have is she's becoming a politician, is never speaking to Gary ever again, as he owns his new pinball business, which is great acting by these young actors. And I hope to see them in more movies in the future. Alana works as Joel's debate office, and she hears about Gary's missing him until Alana sees a man looking like a creep and ask him questions, and Gary and his friends and brother pass out flyers to the pinball business, and these scenes are working quite amazingly. Nighttime comes, and Gary's pinball place is open for business and sees Alana's sister, Danielle, and advises Gary to go to her, and he starts running to Alana. Meanwhile, Alana closes with Brian and gets involved to see Joel at a restaurant getting a drink with him as she grabs his wallet and goes straight to the bar. And as she gets there with Joel and his boyfriend Matthew, as Joel and Matthew have an argument, and as she is caught in the middle of it and sees Joel as an asshole and to Matthew, and she takes Matthew home as they talk about how men are a bunch of shits, and she runs to Gary as Gary is trying to find Alana at Joel's office, and Alana runs to the pinball place and the restaurant where they had from the restaurant, I mean, where they had their first date, and they bump into each other as they bump into front of the movie theater and go back to the pinball machine business, and they become boyfriend girlfriend. And the climax was worked wonderfully, as this movie works great, but at the same time it's a little bit sick. Well, not sick, but like more like it's inappropriate. No wonder it's R-rated. So now it's time for the rating. I'll give this movie a 8.6 out of 10. The performances are magnificent and energetic, as the relationship is beautiful at times, and at the same time heartbreaking and inappropriate, but hell, it's R-rated. What the fuck am I talking about? The shots are great to look at, as I was impressed with how the movie looks, and director Paul Thomas Anderson does a great job with the script. The movie's message is pretty inappropriate, sure, but it works well for adults than kids, but it's wonderfully made, as this movie at the end of the day works great. So I'd like to thank you guys for rejoining me for Paul Thomas Anderson, and until the next one, I'll say this for the Oscar reasons, and the Oscar goes to